8 years ago, I decided to use all of my spare time to try and figure out uh, my brain. So I got rid of all the extras in life and just focused on the brain from the scientific point of view and from the point of view of the various religions or philosophies or codes throughout time, and trying to figure out everybody's vantage point. Because I grew up totally agnostic and knew nothing, this was like the perfect way to study because I didn't have any bias and I didn't care one way or another. I just wanted to gather all the data from all of the different cultures. Because I noticed every single culture has a headdress of some type, a tradition of this, and then in the art, you'll see people's heads glowing, and they're obviously talking about consciousness and the brain and our awareness and our experience of the world. Like, this is what the original wisdom tradition that goes back to Adam and Eve. If you go back and read the chapters about Adam and Eve, it's all consciousness, the first conscious, truly conscious human beings. So this is the underlying wisdom tradition, probably passed down orally at first and then written down in the Torah and the Hebrew Bible, and then by the sages who are the greatest scholars of them all. So essentially, we're studying the human brain via the greatest brains that maybe ever were. You can imagine what they'd be able to accomplish now in this time. So if you go on Sefaria, you can access what the sages had to say about the brain. And you'll find the sources on this are incredible. And when you gather them all up and read through all of them, you can see certain themes start to arise. If you're really paying attention, you can learn how to decipher what they're saying. And I think what I'm going to show here is that it's all stuff that we recognize now. It's all scientifically accurate. For instance, you'll notice they'll say here that the lungs and your breathing affects we'll say, temperature of your brain. So it cools the brain, and they are emphasizing the importance on our breathing, which we know affects our concentration. We know that this affects our brain. If you're looking at an athlete, if he has to make a big shot or do something that's going to be really significant, what does he do? He takes a conscious, aware, deep breath, deep inhale, and purposeful exhale. This is also just as important. And what does that do? It helps his concentration. So we know everything. This is one example. And we'll see how they give you little bits of advice without actually telling you to do anything. If you're really paying attention, you can understand the lesson in all this data. So if you look up brain just in English alone, and you can do this in Hebrew as well, there are 434 individual sources. Now, what I've done is gone through and filtered through all of them and boiled it down to 45 like airtight, rock solid sources that will be very interesting to you. Like, for instance, here's one. The father emits the white seed from which the following body parts are formed for the child: the bones, the sinews, the nails, the brain that is in its head, and the white of the eye. And we'll see throughout that there's a connection here and a theme between preservation of the male seed and the brain, and how these two things interact, and how the seed actually comes from the brain. So this is another thing that it's starting to become popular now with the whole like no-fap movement and all this type of thing. It's actually gaining momentum even in our current world. And you'll also come across like some really interesting stories, like the following, where Titus says that maybe Hashem only works through water, and he says, "Come, let's go on dry land and see what happens." So Hashem says, "Evildoer, son of an evildoer, grandson of an evildoer, I have a flimsy creature in my world, and its name is Gnat." And why do they call it flimsy? Because it has an entrance for its food, but it does not have an exit. Go up on the dry land and make war with it. He went up on the dry land. A gnat came and went into his nose and picked at his brain for 7 years. One day he passed by the door of a blacksmith's house. The gnat heard the sound of the hammer and was still. Titus said to himself, "There is a remedy." Every day they brought a blacksmith and they would hammer in front of him. To a Gentile blacksmith, he would give 4 zuz, which is a type of coin. To a Jew, he would say to him, "It is enough that you should see your enemy like this." So suffering. I didn't give him anything. Until the end of 30 days, he did this. From then on, since the gnat got used to it, he got used to it and resumed his pecking. So he started all over again. Now here's the interesting part. It was learned, Rabbi Pinchas ben Aruva said, "I was among the dignitaries of Rome, and when he died, they opened his brain, and they found in it like a wild bird that weighed 2 selah." I think this is how you would say it. And in a different teaching, it was taught like a 1-year-old chick. Okay, so they are finding something, and they said they found in his brain like a wild bird. They don't say a wild bird, they say like a wild bird, which is kind of cool because if you've looked at enough cross sections of our brain, you'll notice that there's something in there that really does resemble a bird. And we can go through all these different parts of the brain, which there are sources on, and they're connected to even this structure here, the tree of life. Which is interesting. Everybody knows the Kabbalistic tree of life, and they do associate parts of your brain with we'll say the top 4. So what a lot of people don't know, though, is that in your cerebellum, there's a structure called the arbor vitae, or vitae, and it is the tree of life in English. Arbor vitae means tree of life in English. So you see this fern-looking thing with the branches? This is actually in English called tree of life. And we find it here beside this bird. So there's a little bit of what you can expect, and I'll break this up into short videos on the brain according to the biggest brains of all.